Have you ever felt alone for taking a different path? As if everyone is laughing at your choices, without understanding what you carry in your heart. Noah lived exactly this. As the world descended into chaos, he stood firm in the opposite direction, obeying a voice no one else heard. It seemed crazy, until the first thunder echoed. This story is not just about a boat full of animals. It's about faith in the midst of scorn, courage in the face of the impossible, and the chance that God gives to start over, even when everything seems lost. What if I told you there was an ark waiting for you today? That this old story from Genesis can renew your faith, spark your hope, and change your story? Brace yourself, because every detail of this journey reveals more than past events. It reveals eternal principles, about justice, obedience, second chances, and the powerful alliance with a God who never makes mistakes. No matter how dark the storm, the rainbow can still appear. Now, take a deep breath, and come with me to discover why the world laughed, and why, in the end, it was Noah who survived. The world was not born corrupt. He degraded over time, one step at a time, one selfish choice after another. Violence became routine, greed took over, and idolatry replaced the true God. It was like living in a scenario where the light of the sky was replaced by the shadows of the human heart. In the midst of this moral collapse, something screamed for justice. In the midst of so much darkness, there was a different man, Noah. He was not perfect, but he was righteous. While everyone followed their own will, he chose to walk with God. And walking with God sometimes means walking alone. Have you ever been through this? The feeling of being the only one rowing against the tide? Well, Noah knew exactly what that was like. But it is precisely in moments when everything seems lost that God begins to write the greatest stories. Noah didn't come out of nowhere, he was shaped by the faith of generations before him. And now, he became the last hope of a new humanity. Not by his strength, but by his silent obedience, his justice in the midst of chaos. It's curious how, sometimes, God finds a single righteous person and decides to change the course of the entire story because of him. Noah wasn't famous, he wasn't influential, but he listened. And in the midst of the deafening noise of sin, this was a miracle in itself. That's where the next chapter comes in, when that righteous person begins to hear a message that no one else can hear. Imagine hearing a voice that no one else hears, and that voice tells you that judgment is coming. That's what happened to Noah. God spoke to him clearly and directly, the world would be purified by a flood. The evil had gone beyond the limits. But, at the same time as he announced destruction, God delivered a plan of salvation. And this plan started with wood, exact measurements, and a lot of faith. The instruction was almost absurd: build an ark 300 cubits long, 50 wide, and 30 high. Rain like this had never fallen before, and talking about a deluge sounded crazy. But God wasn't interested in human logic, he wanted obedience. And that's where Noah stands out. He asked for no proof, no guarantees. He just believed. Perhaps this is one of the greatest tests we face, trusting what God says, even when it doesn't make sense. How many times has He given you a project that seemed too strange for human eyes? Just like Noah, you may be receiving a calling today that no one else understands, and that's okay. Fidelity always precedes understanding. God didn't just reveal the coming judgment. He also revealed the way of escape. This is how He acts, alerts, guides, and prepares. You just need someone willing to listen. And Noah listened. While the world continued to celebrate, he began to chop wood. What seemed crazy would soon be the only salvation. Hammer in hand, wood being cut, and the structure of the ark began to take shape. It wasn't a one-day project, nor a month-long project, it took decades. Day after day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham and Japheth, dedicated their strength to something that seemed ridiculous in the eyes of the crowd. It was lonely, tiring work, and above all, judged. With each hammer blow, laughter echoed from the neighborhood. Think with me, would you build a gigantic ship, far from the sea, just because God told you to? Noah did this. And while he was building that colossal structure, people called him crazy, fanatical, exaggerated. But he didn't argue. He continued. Sometimes the greatest test of faith is silence in the face of ridicule. Because true faith doesn't need to convince anyone, it just builds. And look how interesting, the ark had no engine or rudder. It was God who would guide her. Noah's mission was just to build and trust. This teaches us something powerful. There are things in life that don't depend on control, but on surrender. While the world sought immediate comfort, Noah invested in the invisible. Each board placed was an act of worship. Even amid the mockery, the ark's progress was visible. And, little by little, what was once a joke began to become a reality that was impossible to ignore. The sound of wood being knocked became the sound of approaching judgment. And that brings us to the next defining moment, when the sky, which seemed so stable, begins to change. Out of nowhere, what seemed impossible began, the animals began to arrive. One by one, two by two, as God commands. Birds crossed the sky, felines appeared among the bushes, and even the slowest ones, like turtles and elephants, came at the right time. It wasn't magic, it was creation's obedience to the Creator. And all this before the eyes of a people who continued laughing, without realizing that the prophetic clock was ticking. Noah's family watched in awe and awe. It was as if heaven itself was orchestrating a silent symphony of preparation. Animals, clean, unclean, large and small, all finding their place on the ark. And even though the sky was still clear, there was something in the air, an expectation, an urgency. God was doing something new, and the signs were everywhere. It's curious how, often, the signs are right before our eyes, but we prefer to ignore them. People saw the animals coming in and still didn't wake up. This teaches us that the problem is not a lack of signs, but a hardness of heart. God always speaks, the question is, are we listening? The door of the ark was still open. The rain had not yet fallen. It was a time of mercy, but it would not last forever. Noah knew this. And even when faced with the miracle of the animals, he didn't stop. He continued to obey. Because the next step was already approaching, and it would come from the sky. The seventh day arrived. The door of the ark, previously open, was sealed by God Himself, and then, the first drop fell. It wasn't just any rain. It was the beginning of the trial. What started as drizzle soon turned into a storm. For 40 days and 40 nights, waters descended from the heavens and gushed from the earth with fury. All of nature seemed to be in convulsion, and everything outside the ark was mercilessly swallowed up. The scene is difficult to imagine. Houses collapsing, trees being uprooted, people running in despair. Many who mocked Noah now knocked on the door of the ark, but it was too late. What seemed crazy became salvation. God's justice does not fail. And when it comes to purify, renew, and also teach. For 150 days, the ark floated above the chaos. It was like a cradle of life in the midst of death. Inside, Noah and his family prayed, took care of the animals and waited. There was no GPS, compass, or weather forecast. just faith. Faith that God, who began that work, would also guide them to the end. And this challenges us: do we trust even when we have no control? The flood was not just destruction. It was a restart. God was sweeping evil from the earth to soon plant something new. But this new one would not come in a hurry. Just as the rain did not come from nowhere, the restoration would also have its time. And that time would begin with a small gesture, coming from the sky through a bird. After months on the water, silence reigned. Nothing but the sound of the wind and the rocking of the ark. Until Noah decides to act with wisdom and patience, he releases a raven. The bird flies, but does not return. Days later, he releases a dove, and it returns. More days pass, and a new attempt reveals something surprising. The dove returns with an olive leaf in its beak. A clear symbol that life was being reborn outside. This leaf represented much more than vegetation. It was a divine sign of renewal. That small branch carried with it a great message: hope is alive. No matter the size of the storm, the last word is not chaos, it is restoration. Noah could have run from the ark, but he waited. He knew that obeying God is not just about starting well, it is also about knowing how to wait for the right time to start over. And look how beautiful, the dove didn't come back the third time. This wasn't abandonment, it was confirmation. The time to leave the ark was near. But even with the dry land, Noah does not rush. He waits for God's direction. Today, we live in a world that rushes, that runs over processes. But Noah teaches us that obedience also means knowing how to pause. Before the new chapter began, there was still something to be done. Something that didn't involve wood or animals, but the heart. Starting over doesn't start with action, it starts with worship. And that's what Noah does when he leaves the ark: he builds an altar. Because before building outside, he knew it was necessary to build inside. Upon leaving the ark, Noah did not rush to explore the new land, nor did he rush to plant crops or build houses. The first thing he does is build an altar. He understands that everything that happened, from warning to deliverance, was God's grace. And when grace is recognized, the natural response is gratitude. With a broken heart, Noah offers sacrifices to the Lord. It was a simple gesture, but loaded with meaning. God was deeply pleased with that attitude. Not because of the smell of the offering itself, but because of the heart behind it. It was there, on that altar of gratitude, that one of the most beautiful promises in the Bible was made. God establishes a covenant with Noah, his family, and all creation. He declares that he would never again destroy the earth with a flood, and to seal this, he places an eternal sign in the sky: the rainbow. The rainbow is not just beautiful, it is sacred. Each time it appears in the sky, it reminds us that even when we fail, God remains faithful. Even when the world goes astray, He continues to offer hope. It's a colorful reminder that there is always a bridge between judgment and mercy. And when we remember this, faith takes on new colors too. This covenant shows that God doesn't just want to punish evil, He wants to renew good. He wants relationship, communion, a fresh start. And that starts with recognizing that everything comes from Him. Noah's altar is an invitation for us to also build our altars, not from stones, but from daily decisions. Because the next step of the journey still holds surprises about our humanity. The earth was dry, judgment had passed, the promise was in heaven, and yet, the human heart still had flaws. Shortly after starting over, Noah plants a vineyard, makes wine, and gets drunk. He who was an instrument of salvation also stumbles. This reminds us of something profound: being used by God does not make us immune to weakness. Noah's righteousness did not make him perfect, just sensitive to the voice of God. This disconcerting moment teaches us that sin was not drowned with the waters of the flood. He remains present, disguised, waiting for openings. And even the righteous, if they are careless, can fall. Noah's vulnerability exposes something we all need to face: there is no new beginning without vigilance. Starting over requires awareness of who we are and who God is. But the beauty is here: God does not cancel Noah because of his error. He does not tear the covenant, nor remove the rainbow from the sky. This shows that divine faithfulness does not depend on human perfection. It's about commitment, about ongoing redemption. Just as Noah had a second chance, so do we. And that chance begins every time we choose to get up, even after falling. This final part of the story is not an anticlimax. It's a realistic reminder: human beings need God all the time, even after victory. The judgment has passed, but the call to holiness continues. The question that remains is, what are you going to do with the new beginning that God has placed in your hands? Because every arc leads us to a choice, and that choice is daily. And now, what does this story tell you? Maybe you're building something that no one understands, and being judged for it. Or maybe you're in the middle of a storm, not knowing if you'll survive. Perhaps he has already left the ark and is trying to find a new meaning, a new altar. At any of these stages, the story of Noah catches up with you. Because it's not just about the past, it's about choices that are still before us. Have you been listening to the voice of God? Have you obeyed even when it doesn't make sense? Have you been building, hoping, trusting? This journey shows that God still makes alliances, still sends signs and, most importantly, still offers second chances. But these chances come with responsibility. After all, every new beginning requires a heart willing to remain faithful when no one else is looking. So, here's a question for your next prayer: what have you done with the new beginning that God gave you? Don't let other people's laughter stop you from obeying. Because when the rain comes, and it always comes, only those who have already built their ark by faith will remain standing. If this story spoke to you, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell and share with someone who also needs to remember: God still speaks, and He still saves.